Hi, so all of this started 4 years back when my family decided to trust my brother and kicked me out of our shipping business over a lie that he had told. I won't get into the details of it, but he had come up with some falsified evidence to frame for stealing from the company and had presented it to everyone at my dad's retirement party. The documents and proof that he had come up with looked real enough, but I'm sure that just one investigation would reveal to everyone that I was not behind it and that I was being framed. I begged my parents to hear me out, but I guess they were in shock or something and they were not thinking straight, so they insulted me and then told me that not only was I being fired, but they also did not want me as part of their family anymore. My dad was the one who had referred to me as a desperate college dropout back when my brother made these accusations against me at his retirement party, and that's what really stunned me beyond belief, since he was the one who had told me that it would be fine when I had initially suggested that I drop out of college after a couple of months so I could join the family business. After I had finished high school, I started college to get a business degree, but I was just not interested. I didn't think that a business degree would help me as much as real-world knowledge by working alongside my father would, and so I told my father about it and he told me that he would be fine with me dropping out as long as I did not sit idly at home and actually put in the work at the company. And that's why I had dropped out, because my father had said that it would be fine, so for him to use that against me was a low blow. I was 24 at the time, so I was really young and stupid, and after I had been insulted, I just walked out of the party and decided never to speak to them again. I was too egoistic to think about my own good, and instead of filing for a wrongful termination lawsuit and getting what I deserved, I allowed my brother to get in the way, and he got away with framing me for theft. So naturally, the family business also went to him after my dad's retirement, even though it was supposed to be me who inherited it. He had just graduated from college at the time and was merely 21 years old, but in spite of that, my dad allowed him to take over the company. I was really upset about it, and I even tried to speak to a couple of my relatives, but even they had cut me off because they believed the lie that my brother had told me. It was also very difficult for me to find work after that because word had spread that I had been stealing from my dad's company, and the only reason they had not bothered to pursue the matter legally was because I was their son. But since people believed that I had stolen from my family business, I couldn't be trusted anymore. I was pretty much blacklisted, and it was really hard for me to find a job, so I was struggling for quite some time. I was honestly not surprised that my brother had pulled off something like this against me because he had always had it for me right from our childhood. Unlike most normal siblings, our rivalry was a bit more intense, and I guess he couldn't stand the fact that the family business was going to come to me, and he would have to work under me if he decided to join us. And that's why he decided to get me fired, under the worst accusations possible, just so he could get the company to himself. But I had never expected my parents to act this way, because even though we had an intense rivalry, they had never played into it and always tried to calm us down instead of encouraging our enmity. So for them to blindly trust him was shocking for me, but later on, I found out that my brother hadn't been entirely stupid. He had been planting seeds of doubt in my father's head way before this revelation, and apparently even bribed some of my coworkers to speak to my dad about my odd behavior and some discrepancies in the finances of the company to arouse suspicion in his mind. Even then, I really feel like they should have at least heard me out and given me a chance to clear my name instead of just inserting me and kicking me out. I should have also been more assertive and a little less egoistic and fought for what was rightfully mine instead of letting it slip through my hands. I'm pretty confident that if I had decided to file a lawsuit against my family, then I would have definitely won and the company would have been mine, since I had put in 3 years of hard work and it was very obvious that I was being framed for a crime that I hadn't even committed. Anyway, I had made a mistake back then by letting the ownership of the company go because I was too proud to speak to my parents. I thought that filing a lawsuit would be like begging for the ownership of the company, and I wanted to show them that it did not matter to me. It was a really stupid move, but I was not about to repeat my stupidity this time. It has been 4 years since then, and I had to move away because nobody was willing to hire me back in my hometown. Here, I run a small-scale delivery business of my own, and I make a decent living, but it's nothing compared to the kind of life I would have had if I had taken over the company like my dad had intended to. So when my parents finally reached out to me last week after almost 4 years of no contact, I decided to put forward a few conditions that I had if they wanted me to come back to them. My parents reached out to me because my dad was on his deathbed. He had always had heart problems, but they had become significantly worse in the past. It was part of the reason why he had to retire early, because the stress of work was also getting to him. But I guess it didn't really help for him to retire, because even though he had put my brother in charge, my brother was still really young and inexperienced. So my dad would have to handle everything behind the scenes anyway, which meant that he was not getting the kind of peace and relaxation that he was supposed to. In the past couple of months, his condition had worsened considerably, and my mother told me that there was very little chance that he would be able to make it out of this alive. On the phone call, she told me that in the past couple of years, they had had their doubts about the truthfulness of the documents, and the evidence that my brother had shown them to prove that I had been stealing from the company, and on several occasions, they had wondered whether they had done the right thing by firing me and cutting me out of the family. But they had been too afraid to reach out to me, just in case my brother had been right about everything. And a lot of time had passed since then, So it was pointless to carry out investigations at this point. Even if they did, it would probably mean losing out on contact with the only son they had with them as well, since it would look like they did not trust my brother either. Things have been very complicated, but now, the only thing that my dad wants is for me to return to the family and run the business alongside my brother. My mother told me that it was his dying wish, and she was crying really bad while talking to me, and said that she really wanted me to come back so I could speak to my dad. I was moved, but I'm not 24 anymore and I'm not as easily influenced as I used to be. So I told her that I needed some time to think about it because 4 years have passed and I have been through a lot, especially for someone who was not even a culprit in the first place. It would not be easy for me to go back to my family all of a sudden, and I told her that I needed her to give me some time. She agreed, and the next day, I had done some thinking, and I called her back to tell her that I would agree to come back to the family, but only on one condition. I told her that I would only come back to the family and meet my father, if and only if he agreed to kick my brother out of the business. Because there was no way on earth that I was going to agree to work alongside him after everything that had happened. He had hated me right from the beginning, but framing me for something that I hadn't done and allowing me to take the fall, essentially ruining my life just because he was competitive and felt like he deserved to take over the company more than I did, was not something that I could let go of. So regardless of whether my dad was going to make it out of life or not, I wanted him to fire my brother and hand over the company to me instead. I wanted things to be the way that they had originally been intended in the first place, and that would be the only way that I would agree to come back to them. My mother was shocked and started saying that she couldn't do that it was insane that I was even demanding something like this, because right now, my dad was on his deathbed, and the only thing that I could think of was the business. But you can't blame me for it. I spent the last 4 years struggling to find a way out of my problems that were only caused because they decided to fire my due diligence. And on the previous phone call, my mother herself had admitted that she and my dad had had their doubts about whether my brother had been entirely truthful or not. In spite of that, they decided not to reach out to me and only did so when my dad was almost gone. Whose fault is that? I can tell you this much, it's definitely not mine, and I was not going to feel sorry for wanting to look out for myself. My mother tried to tell me that if I put forth a condition like this, there was literally no difference between my brother and I told her that she was right. There was no difference because he had forced me to stoop down to his level, and in fact, I wasn't even gonna blame just him. This was something that all of them were responsible for, and now, they could either do things my way, or they could leave me alone because I was not going to make any sacrifices anymore. I then told her exactly how much I had struggled to find a job because of the lies that had been spreading about me, and how I had to relocate to another city, just because of this. And in this new city, where I did not know anyone, I had to start a business on my own to get by, and I had been living hand to mouth initially. They did not know any of this, which is why it was so easy for them to expect me to come back and pretend like this never happened. But unfortunately for them, I was not going to forget. So I told my mother that back when my brother had made those accusations against me, she and my father had found it very easy to let me go. Those accusations had been false. At least I'm telling the truth, and if they can't let go of my brother for my sake, I know where I stand with them. The only befitting punishment for them would be to spend the rest of their lives without ever seeing me again. Then I hung up before my mother could say anything else, and I felt like I was screwing up my life again, because I could very well just let go of my pride this time and join the business, live a better life, and even make things right with my father again, but there was just something that stopped me. I had already been through a lot of hardships in these past 4 years. I guess I just couldn't let it all go to waste by forgiving them so easily. I honestly didn't know if my mother was going to reach out to me again after that phone call, but a couple of days later, I received a text from my dad. He told me that he was extremely sick, and like my mother had already told me, it was very unlikely that he would stay with us for as long as he had expected, and he wanted to make things right with me before he left for his heavenly abode. But I was making things unnecessarily difficult for everyone in the family by setting conditions like these, which were just not needed. He told me that he sincerely wanted me back as a part of the family and running the business alongside my brother, because in spite of everything that had happened in the past, he still loved me, and he believed that my brother and I would keep our enmity aside, at least for his sake. And if I couldn't even do that for a dying man, then maybe I didn't love my family as much as my dad loved me, which was disappointing to learn. He then said that I was free to make my choice, but the conditions that I had set were heartless and cruel, so he didn't know if he would be able to bring himself to entertain that. And now I'm in a dilemma whether I should retract what I had said, or whether I should stick to it and get what is mine. So Ida for telling my dad, who is on his deathbed, that I'm not gonna come back until he fires my brother and hands over the company to me. Update 1. So I read all of the comments in first fall. Just thank you so much for taking the time to say anything at all. My decision was to stick to what I had said, and I informed my parents by texting my dad back yesterday. 3 days had passed since he had sent me that message, and I had thought about it a lot, extensively. And sticking to my words just seemed like the most sensible thing to do. If they had found it so easy to cut me out of their life, I'm sure it wouldn't be very difficult for them to do the same to my brother, and for the right reason this time. If they still believed that my brother had been telling the truth about me being a thief who was stealing from the company, then I don't think they should have contacted me in the first place, because why would you want a thief back in your life? I sent them a message saying that it was not fair for them to expect me to just come back, no questions asked. especially given the circumstances that I had been put in after the lies that my brother had told. My own family had betrayed me and I had made a lot of mistakes the first time around. I did not think that I was going to repeat my mistakes again. So if my parents thought that I was being unreasonable and heartless by setting a condition like that, that was their opinion, but I was not going to change my decision. After this, if they wanted to bring me back to the family, they could either do what I had said, or they could just leave me alone. And to be honest, I was doing decently enough here on my own. Even if they had decided not to accept my condition, I would still be content with the life that I have built for myself. But then, my dad responded to my text by calling me up and putting me in a very difficult spot by suggesting that instead of them entertaining the conditions that I had set forth, maybe I could humor them instead. My dad then asked me if he told me that he was ready to hand over the company to me entirely and fire my brother, but the only other condition was that he would never speak to me again, and neither would I be allowed to speak to anyone else from the family ever again. Would I accept that condition? And honestly, that put me in a tough spot and I had absolutely no idea what to tell him at that moment. I told him that I needed some time to think about it, and he said that I was free to do so, but it was not just a hypothetical situation that he was suggesting. He told me that if I agreed to it, then he would really sign over the company to me, but I would never get to see him or speak to him again. And not just him, not even my mother would ever see me again, and even if it did not make a difference to me, the rest of my family would also follow suit. He even went to the extent of saying that I wouldn't even be allowed to attend his funeral or have anything to do with him. It was a huge dilemma because I knew that this was just a tactic to put me in a difficult spot, but I was not going to let that get to me. So after thinking about it for a couple of hours, I called my father back, and I told him that I had made up my mind. Obviously, he had assumed that I was going to say that I did not want the company, but would rather have my family, but instead, I shocked him by saying that I would rather have him sign the ownership of the company to me, and I was fine with never seeing them or speaking to them again. He was silent for a couple of seconds, and then he started screaming at me, saying that I was heartless, and he was ashamed of the fact that he had raised a son like me. He even went to the extent of telling me that he was going to give me nothing and I was free to live on my own because I had just shown him that I was not worthy enough to be asked to return to the family. I told him that I was fine with it. I had already carved out a life for myself in this city, and the reason that I had found it so easy to say that I did not want to see them again, and I would rather have the company was because they were the ones who had prepared me for it. I told my father that if he had never kicked me out in the first place without a fair and proper investigation and not allowed my brother's words to get to him, then I would have been just as attached to my family as I was in the past, and this would have been an actual dilemma for me. But essentially, my father had just asked me if I would be willing to sacrifice my family and get the family business, and I had done the math in my head. I would essentially continue to live the way I was living for the past 4 years, but my life just would be a lot easier and I would have a lot more money. If I was a more emotional person, which I used to be earlier, I might have picked my family, but I live in the real world, and I made a more practical choice. So they can't hold that against me, since they were the ones who created this version of me. My dad tried to argue and said that when it came to family, emotions always had to be involved, but then I reminded him how emotionlessly he had insulted me and kicked me out back when my brother had accused me of stealing. He did what was best for the company, so now I was doing what was best for my life. There is literally no difference in those two situations, and I guess my dad did not have a reply for that. So he just hung up and he hasn't contacted me since then. Honestly, I don't really know what's going to happen after this regarding my father and the company, but I am beginning to feel less guilty about the condition that I had set forth. Update 2. So a couple of days have passed since my last conversation with my dad and he hasn't reached out to me after that. My mother has also been suspiciously quiet, so I had no idea what was going on there until yesterday. Last evening, when I came back home from work, I was freshening up when my phone started ringing and I decided to ignore it at first, but whoever was calling me did not quit. They just kept calling me again and again until I finally answered out of exasperation. As it turned out, it was my grandparents, who had also cut me off back when my dad threw me out of the family. My dad's father had passed away when he was really little, so it was just my mom's parents and my paternal grandmother on the phone. As soon as I picked up, my grandmother started telling me that she was already losing her son. She did not want him to suffer more than he already was. And she told me that the last conversation I had had with him had really shaken him up and he had been crying for hours after he hung up. She said that she couldn't see him suffer like this, and wanted me to come back to him and just speak to him in person because that would be the right thing to do. She started crying on the phone and I found it very difficult to ignore it, but I was not going to go back on my word. I told my grandparents that I was terribly sorry for riling my father up, but that had not been my intention. I had only wanted to tell him that he had left me in a very bad situation, and now, I did not feel obliged to help alleviate his feelings of guilt. That's it. I did not demand anything that was not rightfully, and it was completely up to him whether he wanted to leave the company to me or not. However, I was not going to sacrifice my self-respect and my dignity and go back to the family that had treated me like crap. My grandparents tried to convince me that families do go through tough phases, but as his son, it's my duty to forgive my father for his mistakes and at least try to move on from it. But I don't share the same beliefs and I was very firm with them. Eventually, my mom's parents just said that this was a hopeless case and that I had become too selfish and blinded to open my eyes to the reality of the situation and realize that I was going to lose my father without ever being able to make things right with him again. They said that it was not only my father who was suffering, but also the daughter, my mom, who was going to lose her husband, and I didn't even seem to care about anyone, not even her. They claimed that she would be left completely on her own after he was gone and I should be there for her as her son, but that was simply not true. She would have my brother and her parents. But I was the one who had been left completely on my own after everyone cut me off over a bunch of lies. So forgive me if I don't feel sympathetic towards them. My grandmother tried to reason with me again, saying that I would regret all of this once my dad was gone and that I should take up the opportunity to make amends with him before he passed away. At that time, I just hung up because I really did not want to waste more of my time speaking to them. It had become very clear to me that nobody in this family was ready to acknowledge the very obvious fact that they had done something very wrong to me and had treated me very badly. And for me to ask to be compensated for that, it was neither unfair nor unreasonable. They could argue that I was being heartless right now, but they had also been the same way with me in the past. I don't believe in being the bigger person, I just think that it opens you up to being screwed over again and again. And I did not want to take the chance, so I was doing simply what I thought was necessary. If that makes me the bad guy, I'm fine with it. It's not like I'm gonna have to deal with anything new. They have been treating me like I was the villain in this family for the past 4 years anyway. Might as well just lean into it and get what I want. So if anyone calls me after this to argue with me, I'm just gonna hang up unless they are calling to tell me that things are gonna be done my way. Update 3. Hey, everyone. So for the past 2 weeks, I have been pretty MIA after my last update. Truth be told, there was nothing much to talk about since I had told everyone that after this if they were contacting me, it had to be because they had come to a conclusion about what they wanted to do, but I just don't want any arguments anymore. My mind is made up and nobody can do anything to change it at this point. So nobody really spoke to me for a week and a couple more days. Then, finally, I was contacted by the most unexpected person. My brother sent me an email saying that he had no idea that our parents had contacted me and he had only found out about it a couple of days before he sent me that email. He said that he had heard about the condition that I had set and told me that there was no way that would ever be able to get my way and said that he was pissed at our parents for contacting me because that goes against him and said that he just won because he knows that now that he is upset, our parents will do anything not to lose him as well and that means that I'm not gonna get what I want. So I might as well give up hope of ever taking over the company because that's his now. I didn't even bother responding to that, I just blocked the email address he was sending it to me from. I had resumed my normal life and was trying not to bother myself by thinking about my family, but my dad sent me a message today saying that he had thought about it for a really long time and had decided that he was not going to fire my brother and things are going to remain the way that they are. He apologized profusely for treating me badly and said that even my mother and the rest of the family were really sorry and they would always be open to connecting with me in the future, but he was just in a rush because he was not sure if he would be around for a little longer. However, his doctors have told him that there is no immediate threat since his health has improved a little, and it will keep improving as long as he keeps taking his medication on time, so I'm glad that things worked out for him. But for now, he doesn't think it would be right to fire my brother just because I said so. Even though he had done that to me so, anyway, I was not disappointed at all. I had kind of seen this coming so I was mentally prepared for it. But what I didn't expect was that my father said that he would be ready to finance my new company since he knew that I had started a business a couple of years back that I was running. So maybe I'll take him up on that offer because I'm actually looking for investors and this might be a good day for him to correct his past mistakes. But that depends on whether I feel like it in the future. For now, I'm staying away from my family like I have in the past.